Welcome to Aging Out or Growing Together, right? Flipping the youth service paradigm to better support young adulthood. Today's session is largely about culture as an intervention in case management and youth development work. And it is titled Elevating Culturally Affirming Practices in Youth Service Agencies. Thank you for that. My name is Oriana Ides. My pronouns are she and hers. I'm joining from unceded Ohlone land, and I am incredibly honored to be kind of curating and facilitating this panel discussion today. So today we arrive at our third session in the series of 5. We have kicked it off with a general session that uplifted the multitude of needs and experiences that many transitional aged young folks are engaged in as they traverse this part of their lives. And last session in January, we had 2 incredibly powerful speakers share the ways in which they are working across systems, across institutions to support young people. And so we uplifted the need and the practical ways in which we could go about building cross-system teaming with caregivers and with the young people themselves, which is often overlooked. Today, we uplift the incredible power of culturally affirming and culturally sustaining services as they are an intervention to support young folks in this portion of their journey in all ways. So our guiding question for this series is how my organizational values, program design, implementation strategy, and long-term vision for young adults expand to most effectively build collaborative and responsive networks of support, right? Our agencies and we as individuals within our agencies often have a choice around how we can either grow or age out young people. And so today's session and this series is really a call to think reflectively about the ways in which your organization is expanding, growing, evolving to really serve the needs of this specific population who is so often overlooked. As we are engaged in today's listening and conversation, I invite you to recall this question always as a kind of home base for our filtering and our engagement. One thing that I'm really excited about in regard to this series is our 5 gems. And so maybe a show in the chat or a reaction if you have had the chance to interface with the 5 gems yet. Creating with these 5 gems are some really poignant learnings that or through themes of each session. And so our January session with Kriya Gomez and Valerie Slater uplifted these 5 principles within young adult development work. And so in thinking about cross-systems teaming, they really uplifted the power and potential of meaningful dialogue across teams and how that supports the learning of organizations and the growing and expansion of organizations to meet the needs of their client population. They have found in their lived experience, and maybe you as well, that there isn't always dialogue across institutions, that young people may have a medical plan or mental health plan from an institution that doesn't get communicated directly with the juvenile justice system or with education systems. And so they found that really creating open streams of dialogue and collaboration could support the journey of a young person. Also spoke to the ethical communication across systems. Young people are often made to retell their story over and over and over again in ways that can actually be traumatizing. And so there was a lot of mention and actual practical ways in which organizations could minimize the need to ask a young person to retell their story. And how to tell the story in ways that are actually empowering and support the framing of their experience, that give them some context for why they must have endured what they have endured, situating in a sociopolitical context. And so another really important learning that came out of our last session was that young people and young adult growth development is not linear, as is not healing. Right. And so we can probably agree that we've all seen steps forward and steps back and steps to the side, right? And understanding that as part of young people's journey and growth, and not necessarily a horrible thing. I listened to a Black Panther share that this reframe around like reliving our history. And he said, it's not reliving, it's actually remixing, right? That we never experience the same thing twice, that there's always some new knowledge, there's always a new resource, there's always something new and learned within the cycling of our journeys, and even the what seems like steps back. And so want to offer that. And then just reiterating this sense of belonging that is so critical for creating safety and growth. And that it is all of our duties to protect and nurture opportunity for young people to engage in self-realization and dreaming. So we have this offering for you. Ingrid has shared it in the chat. There's more context provided in the document. We encourage you to read it, to share it, to think about it, call it into your professional development. And we would love to hear your experience with any of these gems, any of the elements that we share. If you feel like you are uplifting this ability to support young folks in their self-realization and ability to dream. So a bit of framing about today, very briefly before we welcome in the wisdom of Dana, Patrick, and Ricardo. But reconnection and reclamation of culture has been proven through the work of Tara Yasso, of Roderick Watt, of Virgil Moorhead, and so many others, to be a really powerful and actually very necessary intervention in supporting the mental health and wellness of all people, but young people specifically. And so today's session really is about understanding the nuances of this intervention and the special gifts embedded within our culture and connection with our culture as we support the needs of transitional age young folks. And so the ways that we are individually and organizationally embracing home culture, right? As well as the really vibrant and ever-evolving youth culture that our client populations are building and growing as we speak, can mitigate pre-morbidity, alcoholism, substance misuse, violence that young folks may inflict upon themselves in a myriad of ways, or project out into the world they're within. And so we want to share that as a bit of a framing. And I have a incredibly beautiful poem that I want to offer into this space. Invite you to listen from that settled space, from the space of your young person close in your heart. And so this poem was read or performed at the White House maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and maybe 8 years ago. And it was offered by Mayra de Valle. And so we're gonna transition it into this poem, and then we have a few reflection questions for you after.
Grandmother, our common thread began in my mama's womb. Spun my fetus like a record in her cipher, sampled your stubborn and mixed in her father's posture. Our connection is full circle. Abuela, you bear of children. You seer of spirits. You are truly miraculous. You are the whispers of litanies and white tablecloths. Your melody is captured in the spilled candle wax of my skin. My tongue's a broken needle scratching through the grooves of a lost wisdom, trying to find a faith that beats like yours. What secrets do your bones hold? What pattern does your dust settle into when I beat these drums inside my ribs? What color was the soil of your grandmother's garden? Grandma, how did you pray? Did you store the memory of your creator in strands of hair tucked into scented soap boxes or placentas buried under avocado trees? What reservoir did you pull your faith from? Was it anything like this gumbo, this sancocho, this remix of rituals and chants sampled from muscle memory and spirits that visit my dreams that I struggle to stir into discipline to honor the unseen with these shells, this sage, these rudrashka and rosary beads, these white candles, crystals, statues, this sweet water, honey, rum, and sweet grass? Abuela, how did you pray before someone told you who your God should be? How did you hold the earth in your hands and thank her for its fecundity? Did the sea wash away your sadness? How did you humble yourself before your architect? Did you lower yourself to your knees or rock to the rhythm of ocean waves like I do? Grandma, how did you pray? Some say faith is for the weak or small-minded, but I search for your faith everywhere. Need it to reassemble myself whole from these shards of Chicago ice and island breezes so I can rewrite the songs of your silence and pain, your lonely fists, broken tooth smile and burdens into a medley of mantras. Wish you could have shown me its shape, but I know it's in every sacred breath, in the shadow of trees that you visit me in the flicker of flames I stare into, searching for what's divine. And I know my body is the instrument my maker uses to rearrange the broken chords of your history into a new symphony for my unborn children's feet to dance to. And I see you, grandmother, gathering with your sister to chant the names of the living and the dead and remind us all that we're the gathered in marble temples around a midnight fire or block party speakers. We have always raised our hands to the sky, trying to touch the invisible force that holds these cells together into a fragile mass. Children of different nations, but the same vibration. We be sound to beat, to bass, to bone, to flesh. We be sound to beat, to bass, to bone, to flesh. We are all truly miraculous.
So much to say about that poem, so many places. Her words, her energy took my heart, my mind, my energy. The power of remembering, right? The power of connecting, intergenerational power. Yes, absolutely. As I hear her words, I feel into what has been stolen from us, the ways that we've been intentionally disconnected from our practice, our ritual, our ways of being whole, the passion, the resistance, right? She's channeling her grandmother and her great-grandmother. And I hear those words, I think about like the concrete practice and ritual and the things that we do, but also the spirit and the energy and the values and the belief, right? Faith isn't necessarily a practice, it's a way of being. And so thank you for listening into that poem, to feeling it from your settled place. Thank you for sharing in the chat what it brings up for you. And I want to provide us the space to now think about how we describe our own relationship to ancestral ways and cultural practices. Quite often we can think about ways of supporting a young person's journey through something or with something, and we skip the step of thinking about our own engagement. And so it is incredibly critical that we constantly examine, reflect, embrace our own ways of engaging with cultural practice, with ancestral knowledge, before we and alongside our work with young people. Does anyone feel called to share verbally or in the chat your response to that poem and or this invitation to reflect? And maybe the reflection is just personal, which is fine. There's no need to share, but the invitation stands. An additional layer into that inquiry and reflection is, how have you created space for your client's home culture, for youth culture to be at center? How have you allowed it to enter into the work that you do and the ways that you hold space? How might you or have you integrated ancestral knowledge and acknowledgement into your work with clients? So this honoring their needs, right? In order to honor the needs, we must listen, we must ask, we must create the space, right? The trust and the sense of belonging so that we can truly honor. And so honoring the request to stay connected to culture. These are all seeds, right? And scaffolding for our conversation today. And so, this is strength-based right here for sure, right? Trying to find out what they are proud of, what part of their heritage they connect with most, and then building on that. We're incredibly grateful and in for an incredible treat today with Ricardo Garcia Acosta, the Director of Community Peace at Courage here in Oakland, California, Community United for Restorative Justice. And he is joined by two others, Dana Lucio, Behavioral Health Program Manager and Clinical Supervisor in Hawaii, the Residential Youth Services and Empowerment Program, RISE, and then Dr. Patrick Kamanyang, a full-time faculty and department chair at the University of San Francisco Social Justice Education Program. And so maybe in this order, Ricardo, Dana, and then Patrick, I invite you to introduce yourself briefly and share your current work and your journey towards your work. And then something you've learned through your work or your lived experience about young adulthood.
So as Ori mentioned, I'm the Director of Community Peace Programs at Courage, and I'm just super excited to be here today, especially talking about healing, cultural healing, and all of our journeys that we're in, and being in this together. I started this work as a late teen after the loss of my parents. I'm a proud Oaklander, but I also led me to a life of being on the streets, being formerly incarcerated and system impacted. And the same way the streets took me in is the same way that our community programs, community advocates also took me in and saved my life through love, direction, consistency. And so this work is very near and dear to my heart. As I got into the work and started a journey in a life of service, I would find myself by my late 20s leading San Francisco's gang intervention strategies, doing crisis response work there, and then later on working for the city of Oakland to support our hospital-based and homicide programs, where I would work with young adults and their families that have been impacted by gun violence. So this journey has taught me a lot, and working with young people, especially Tay-aged youth, is really about not being scared to love, show genuine love. And to use the word love. One of my first mentors told me when he first met me, I love you and I don't even know you, right? And, coming from that place of genuine caring, of knowing that we're all in this together, that if our young people in our communities heal, we heal together. I mean, we all heal. And so I think that's just one thing that taught me along this way, working with young people, is not being scared to show genuine love and tell them we love them. Because lots of times that's the one thing that they're missing in their lives.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Aloha, everyone. My name is Dana Lucio. I am the Behavioral Health Program Manager, and I'm coming all the way from Oahu the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And I just want to say thank you all so much for your time and for being here today. It truly is an honor to be a part of this. And I feel really humbled. So thank you for this experience. As I said, I am with Residential Youth Services and Empowerment. We're also known as RISE. And with that, I'm a licensed mental health counselor, a certified substance abuse counselor, and a certified anger management counselor. And so with that, I work with young adults who are ranging from the ages of 14 to 24. And I find a specific passion working with this group because I had some challenges when I was within that age range, and I encountered a lot of those challenges as a young adult. And my hope is to, make the slightest impact on some of the youth to lead to like decreased victimization and or traumatization. I have been blessed with so many young adults that have shared many of their challenges in their life with me. And I'm thankful that they trust me to share some of those experiences that they have encountered. And for me, it's really important to give them like a safe space to be able to open up and share some of those vulnerabilities. And I've learned that many young adults, they're really just initially hesitant to request help or to get that support because, like Ricardo said, a lot of them have never heard hey, I love you and I care about you and stuff. So it's a lot harder for them to open up and to feel that safety because they've never had that before. So they're a little hesitant whenever they first start to receive our care and our support. And my goal with that is to, just provide them with that safety that's needed so that they can address those needs, right? I can usually accomplish this by like viewing all of our youth with like an unconditional positive regard. And that's something that we try to, that we just try to use daily at RISE. So thank you again for this opportunity. And I hope that we can all take away something beautiful from this experience.
I'm Filipino American from a working class background, born and raised in Los Angeles. From Echo Park in Mid-City, moved to South Central Los Angeles, where I taught for LA Unified for 10 years, mostly at this place called Crenshaw High School. I moved to the Bay Area in 2008, where I taught in OUSD as a university professor for 6 years, 4 years at Fremont High School, and then 2 years at Castlemont High School for the past decade or so. I have been teaching high school seniors in a class called Critical Issues in Education. So, around the 17, 18, 19-year-old age range. And I also teach teachers at the University of San Francisco, where I try to draw on health science research, like psychology, epidemiology, social work, and more to put in conversation with like culturally relevant teaching, right? Mostly focused on socially transformative teaching, social transformation and humanization through teaching or teacher education, right? Teaching teachers. And so most of my like inspiration comes from just learning from life. I was pushed out of school, at 15 when my principal looked at my report card and said, I wasn't made for a school like, LA High. So then I really try to increase my participation in horizontal violence, much like Ricardo was talking about, which comes as a result of vertical violence, right? So because this systemic violence is sort of competition for a limited set of resources, I thought that I found most joy by taking out my internalized pain on others. And later on, an elder in the community, Black person, and I'm Filipino, so we in LA is real segregated, but this elder, we found ourselves in a situation, and then he told me that I was doing exactly what the system wanted us to do, and when I did some reflection on that, I decided I was going to be the type of teacher I wish I had prior to hating school, right? Even as early as second grade, right? So anyway, most of my inspiration with serving youth came from that conversation, right? Learning from a person I wasn't supposed to learn from, an OG in the community, in a place I wasn't actually supposed to learn from, my Men's Central Prison. And I think something I learned, about young adulthood along the process is honors that old adage that young people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and a bit of what you have or are continuing to learn from your young folks and client population. think it's important as we're bringing our wisdom into this space that we're also bringing the wisdom of our young folks, because there's so much there. And so the next question is in relation to the unique needs or experiences of this age population. So 17 to 26 or 27-year-olds, right? That's the kind of age range of transitional age young folks or young adults. And it's ever growing as we're learning more about brain science and the prefrontal cortex. And so just asking you to share in your perspective, what have you learned to be the unique experiences and needs of transitional age young folks navigating from adolescence to adulthood?
One thing that I've learned about the unique experiences of the students that I've worked with, right? It's probably not universal, but students who typically are in economically targeted communities that are, Black or brown. I think there's so much, even, at the age of 17, there's so much unresolved historical grief, right? And, to counter that, I found nothing more motivating, or some people might even say healing, than the power of, counter hegemonic spaces, right? If hegemony is sort of social control, there's nothing like the motivating power of spaces that challenge social control, right? And at the same time, even if young people learn to be critically conscious, whatever, how that might mean, we can still get caught slipping, right? They can get caught slipping, right? But we have to also let them know that regardless whatever situation they find themselves in, that they could bounce back. They can learn from experience, right? So we need to make students aware of the social conditions that they have to navigate on a day-to-day basis, support them in making informed, critical decisions. Around that age, so many young folks are struggling to cope. So, 17 to 25, 35-year-olds, to cope, to not cope, or even maladaptively cope with the social stressors in their everyday life. Because we've internalized, narratives that are imposed on us or imposed on them by systems of inequality that are at odds with the history and dignity of, their people. And so we learn to blame ourselves for our own suffering. So we need an education that allows young people to understand the world from their own point of view, right? In their own interest, right? Where we value their experiences rather than just sort of tell students what they need to do. So they need to develop a way of understanding the world that is in the interest of themselves, in the interest of the people they love, and in the interest of the communities that they are a part of.
Want to piggyback on that is really stands out is just being kind. Our young people blame themselves a lot, and when they're understanding the social context of all the things that are working against them, right? How do we remind them to care for themselves, right? To not feel like every day is doom and gloom. And one of the things that's here big in Oakland, man, and in California in general, this is way before the marijuana weed market became legal, right? Is trees, youngsters call it as trees, and having, smoking hella weed is just part of their kind of normal upbringing, right? And so when we look at the frontal lobe cortex and development of brain, and then once you start breaking down with them, look, dude, it's not your fault. Your brain's barely developing, and y'all are smoking this high potent ass weed, and it's messing up the development of that, right? And those are the things that are responsible for long-term planning, decision making, right? And when you're 19, 20, 22 years old and still trying to figure that out naturally, and then on top of that, you're drinking and smoking to deal with the trauma, with the pain, and with all these different conditions you have, right? That it's okay that you're doing dumb shit. It's understandable, right? Don't be so hard on yourself. How can we take it and little by little start addressing these root causes of why you're either self-medicating or why you're isolated, so we could start kind of unraveling that and making better decisions. So I think I always remind these youngsters that I work with, man, these young adults, that man, just be kind to yourself. We're all struggling, right? You see me doing well, you see other people in our service providers doing well, people around you, but it's a struggle every day for me to get up sometimes, right? And certainly when I was 19, 20, they're probably doing a lot better than I was back then, right? So just kind of reminding of that and just really inspiring them, and getting them to understand that they do have the power of their lives, their bodies, their families, and they could change the conditions of their community if they're able to move from resilience and move beyond that into like resistance and self-determination and what they want to see for themselves, their family, and their community.
Thank you both so much for uplifting the power of like, for a young person, what is mine to hold and what is not. I think developmentally, we know that there's like, they're transitioning from a place of self-absorption to beginning to see the world. And so having a framework to understand both of those kind of aspects, right, is incredibly important. And if without it, you can absolutely lead to self-blame and self-loathing and believing that you are the sole cause for your situation. So thank you both so much for sharing your perspective on that. The next question is, how do you define culturally affirming and sustaining practices? And it's a two-part. How have you seen ancestral, familial, and youth cultures support a young person in their journey towards healing and wellness?
I mean, I think for me, culturally affirming or sustaining spaces is about starting with youth, their lives, their lived experiences as like the starting place of all learning, of all engagement, of all, steps forward, right? So we need to like work on tapping into the brilliance that's already there. But at the same time, we need to honor and celebrate people's like this is something I've learned more recently, like they're tap into their intersecting realities so that different members of our spaces feel safe and supported and understood on their own terms, right? For so long, we've thought of culture as a proxy for race, but sometimes even anti-racist spaces have been like heteronormative or binary and ableist even, right? So unwelcoming for queer and trans people, as well as those who are like atypically bodied or deaf or blind or mentally and physically diverse. And these are all things that I had to learn, right? And so if I'm contributing to people's marginalizations in ways that I despise, then it's not really culturally affirming or sustaining. So I think we need to help also young people, position them to make deep critical sense of their, multiple identities, how they understand their class, economic-based realities, their gender, their sexual orientation, their cultural experiences, their race, the ways that they're racialized, right? So they need to also make deep critical sense of, the social conditions that they have to navigate on a day-to-day basis that shape their worldviews. And so as an educator, as a teacher, I want to evaluate young people on the social compassion, right? We think about testing, right? But the way I want to evaluate young people is on the social compassion, on the critical thinking, and the leadership skills that's needed to transform, dehumanizing and unjust social conditions.
One thing we say here, and it's a common term that you probably have all heard, is la cultura cura, right? Culture cures. And to Pat's point, like, it could be reconnecting to our own indigenous cultures, our family history, but it could also be embracing our young youth culture, right? Things look a lot different than they were 20 years ago when I was a young teen, right? And as cool and as hip as I think I am sometimes, like these young folks will remind you like, nah, bro, you old, man, we got a new way of doing things, right? And so really embracing that and really empowering them to say like, look, your talents, your stories, your contributions, those are all things that are like imperative to like redefining what the world is going to look right under your watch, right? And that we're passing that torch, but also reconnecting them to the multi-generational approach and understandings and some of these cultural practices. One thing that really is impactful for our young people that we share is just, the idea that we stand on the shoulders of greats. We stand on the shoulder of struggle, of all kinds of social movements, of cultural ancestry that's been here for thousands of years, right? And when we could tap into that and then really find the intersection between our old history and our old cultural ways with this new way of doing things with our new culture and how they define themselves, especially like here in the Bay Area, the young folks are proud, man. They're proud to be from the Bay. They're trendsetters, right? So how do we provide that space so they can embrace that? They could, find a way to monetize that, right? And do something positive for their lives, right? Build that social enterprise. When I first started doing violence prevention, 15 years ago in the Mission District doing gang intervention work, it looks a lot different than it does now, right? Now, young people don't want to hear so much about services. And yeah, there's certain needs and certain things that you got to, be able to help provide resources for. But really right now, it's really about affirming where they are at and how they see themselves in the world and helping mold that. And that has really given just a whole other abundance of conversations, of ways that we could just kind of relate with one another, right? And really thinking about how do we incorporate some of these, cultural practices, rituals, right, circles, and things that way, but in a way that relates to them, that they don't feel like, oh, you're teaching me some of this old ancient stuff that doesn't apply to my life, right? And getting them to understand the intersectionality between how we used to do things and the cultural practices that our families carry in those traditions, and how that shows up in their day-to-day lives, right? And how they could tap into that and tap into their power. And so that's really important for us. And the other thing too is, like, we really believe that every young person is a blessing, right? And they have a sacred purpose. And so that's one of the things that we kind of try to reaffirm all the time with our young people, because, lots of times as young folks are trying to find themselves, it's really important to remind them that, like, dude, you are sacred and you have a sacred purpose, and the things that we do are going to impact our generations to come, your friends, your family, and harnessing that power is something that is transformative and is powerful for them to be able to see that quality within themselves.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really beautiful and important that you're engaging in this work from this perspective, and that we're sharing it here. And just see in the chat, there's like, elevating the fact that there's so little opportunity for young people to learn how to think critically and reflectively and with wonder about themselves and about the worlds that they're in. And so for folks to find your program and to find work with you, and everyone here who's echoing this beautiful sentiment and way of engaging is powerful and transformative. So thank you for what you're offering. The next question is how might transitional age young folk, how might TASTE serving organizations work in partnership and learning to understand and embrace culturally sustaining practices in a manner that's respectful and authentic, right? And so, Ricardo, you spoke a bit about, like, how do we create space for youth culture that is emerging right now that is so different from us, right? How do we enter into a community that we are not a part of and create gracious space for that to be at the center rather than our own ways of conditioned being that's often quite different. And so, yeah, I'll pose that question.
Yeah, and I'll just, just to be brief, I think, as we're going on this journey of self-exploration and walking with our young people to find their sacred purpose and their self and their histories and their culture, it's also important to embrace other people's cultures, right? And especially here in the Bay Area, we're blessed to be so diverse and so multicultural, and how they're all intersecting like this Bay culture, right? And so a lot of, one thing that we did last summer and that we're gearing up to do this summer as well is hosting, these multicultural Black parties, really with having real intention to build Black, Brown, API unity amongst our young people, right? We've seen a rise in, under the Trump era, like it's always been here in this country, right? But we've seen a sharp rise in hate speech. We've seen a sharp rise in hate crimes, right, to our immigrant and Asian populations, right? And our young people often, are on this journey of, when they're not healing and they don't give a F, right? They're like, well, F it, anybody could get it, right? And oftentimes it's our most vulnerable populations that end up being on the brunt of that, right? And so what we've done is created these spaces for us to have community events where folks could come together, folks could learn each other's cultures, right? To have different Indigenous, African, Latino, Aztec dancers, right? Having our Chinese lion dancers there, right? And just having everybody come together, and young people actually taking part in service so that they could see themselves as being a solution to the community, right? And literally service, like bringing plates to our elders, right? Helping them get from the parks to their cars and things like that, right? And when they see themselves in that connection and how we're all connected together, it's part of not only their healing process, but they also learn about each other's, history and their cultures, and how all of us have very similar stories, right? And how we've all ended up here in the Bay. And so just learning from one another and embracing one another has really showed just some positive outcomes, just like that are just powerful in our community, where our young people are seeing themselves in other elders, seeing themselves in other elders from other cultures. And that learning process has been huge in terms of like how we're, again, trying to build this movement of our young people working together and embracing themselves, and what they could bring to this world, rather than just looking at things as, services and programs, right? But actually building a movement with young people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ricardo. Thank you so much for all of that. I think my only part to add on to that is that it's important for us as agencies to not only understand the preferences that the clients have, but also understand how our cultural norms and our cultural background may impact our delivery of service to the clients. So taking that time to just educate our staff, educate ourselves and our partners, and others on the cultural practices and preferences. And with that, considering our partnerships, it's ideal for agencies to partner in the educational practice of cultural awareness within the workspace. And for me specifically, working in Hawaii and not being from Hawaii, I take a great pride in being able to self-reflect and also to make adjustments to my practices. We don't want to utilize our baseline of like therapeutic services that may not align well with their cultural practices and preferences. So just taking that time to reflect and to educate and to really learn. And I think that's really important for us to be able to provide that respectful and authentic care for the clients.
Just in all the spaces that I'm in, whether it's at the graduate level of universities, undergraduate universities, or even seniors and lower grades, I think we, as any system that I've been a part of, try to treat young people or youth or transitional age youth as experts in their own experiences, right? So that we see what they're telling us, see their truth as like a text, right? Something that is worthy of interrogation, worthy of understanding, worthy of processing, right? The way we would honor, something more so-called like canonical, right? Something more from these supposedly important older white men or dead white men, right? But so too often though, I think like adults, right, who have a deficit point of view of young folks in communities of color, they feel implicated. We'll feel implicated whenever young folks will tell us their truth about having to navigate the socially toxic, socially oppressive conditions of their everyday life. We'll feel like they're talking about us, and we'll like do things, or our facial expressions might communicate something that tells these young people that that we don't want to listen to them, or we think that they're wrong. So we need to find a way to just like listen to young people on their own terms, right? And this requires that we're gonna have to put away our moral compass so that we could hold space in ways that young people feel listened to and supported. But at the same time, we're elders, right? If we're part of this work, we're elders. We've learned from our own experiences in some way, shape, or form. So we could challenge young people in a loving way to grow into their highest sense of self, right? Ask them what they think their behavior or their thought processes mean for the communities that they love the most, or for themselves, how they feel about that, what they want to be for their family, what they want to be for their community, what they want to be for themselves. And then what's the next sort of steps immediately in the next 2 or 3 years, 3 to 5 years, for them to be the kind of person they would be proud of, the kind of person their community would be proud of, the type of person, that would be supportive of their family. And so, in those ways, I think we need to, structurally and through our program, celebrate young people. And so, because so many of them have already overcome circumstances that would destabilize most of the adults who are serving them. But as the adults, we need to also model the type of critical self-reflection we would want to see them engage in, right? We can't just ask them, tell us all about yourself and what have you been through and what are you going to learn from that if we don't model for them the same kind of learning process from our own lives, right? What are the mistakes we've made? What impact did that have on our life, right? How are those setbacks providing opportunities for us to learn and grow into even more experienced, wiser people, community members, and elders? And so I think ultimately we need systems and structures that help young people develop, transitional age youth, develop a stronger knowledge and love of self, to develop solidarity across perceived differences, and to use their education, use their jobs, use their commitments in a way that serves the people they love the most.
These experiences are forming new neural pathways, right? That oftentimes, as a result of traumatic experience or early substance use, those pathways are formed. But this way of really listening, holding space without moral judgment or with, listening and seeing fully is healing, is a true intervention. And so thank you for the ways that you're uplifting that. I want to encourage folks that are in our audience, so all participants, to start to think of some questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists. And so as you're formulating some questions that you have for today's panelists, I'm going to ask the last question that I have. And then we'll have some brief time for your questions. So please call them into the chat. And the last question that I have is for you to share your vision or dream for young adults in this world. And so this is me a question for all of our panelists briefly. What's your vision and dream for young adults in this world? What do you think is possible given the context of right now? And what relationally and structurally needs to change for this vision to actualize? So that's my last question, and maybe Cam, Zaina, and Ricardo can answer that. And if you're in the audience, we welcome you to share in the chat your questions right now, and we'll have a few moments for them.
Thank you. And I think, Dana and Ricardo alluded to this, and Audrey, and before everyone came, and that's maybe not a term that I love, but it makes sense. This concept of like a wounded healing or wounded healers, right? Where, you can't serve the needs of others until you work to serve your own needs. And then when you've learned to sort of work through your own struggles, then you can sort of professionalize, or in Ricardo's words, monetize or systematize your own growth, so that you can share that with other young youth so that they can grow on their own. So I think we need young people to I see a future, or my vision for the dream for these young folks is to sort of build on the legacy of brilliance and abundance that came before them, the shoulders that we stand on, as I heard earlier, so that they can thrive, right? And so it's different than surviving that other people talk about. When you think about thriving, this concept of thriving, it's about joining others in transforming the social conditions that shape our social trauma to begin with, right? It's, from Leonard Simon, epidemiologist at Cal, said, hope is a sense of control over our life. So joining others so that we can have a sense of control over our life to change the conditions that contribute to our social trauma to begin with is thriving. Thriving is also, is finding strength by making critical sense of our struggles, right? Finding purpose. My vision is helping young people find purpose by putting, past pain in its like proper perspective, so that they're in touch with some of their most pressing needs and are willing to commit their lives to becoming for themselves and for others what they wish they had when they were experiencing struggles in their own lives. Because if we don't heal from our past pain, we will project onto youth, or if they don't heal from their past pain, they'll project onto others the hurt they have yet to process through the process of transference, right? Where they'll transfer onto others this sort of learned helplessness. And I think if young people and ourselves can discover ways that we have been able to grow, then we can, help teach young people the tools for them to grow on themselves. And lastly, I would say that requires that we prioritize wellness in relationship to critical consciousness, so that we have social compassion and leadership.
For me, my vision, my dream, I guess that is like, my hope is that we as providers, we continue to nurture the relationships that we have with our transitional age youth, as they're our next generation, right? The more that we offer them in their time, and the more support that we give them, and the more space that we give them to really explore and be themselves, and to really get through many challenges of life, the more that we're there for them, the more they're going to be there for us in our future, right? It's my personal dream to empower youth to gain independence and confidence, and to also provide them safety so that they are able to live their fruitful lives. And I think in order for this to be achieved, many of us service providers, we need to continue to raise awareness of the needs in the community, with motivation to gain support from different types of funding sources. As we all know, it's very underfunded. And a lot of times, due to that, the services that we provide, we lose great providers because of the lack of ability to maintain them financially, especially with the cost of living in Hawaii and stuff. So my hope is to also, find streams of income to hold on to those who are really passionate about servicing individuals within this population, because they're here for a reason, and they have that impactful ability to really touch our next generation.
A little outside the box in that regard is, paying our because we believe in, for us, by us, right? And hiring from our community, and really having our staff and our organization reflect the community they're serving. But a big part of that is also paying folks a living wage. I remember, back in the day when there wasn't a lot of resources in this work, and working with young people that are being system impacted or being impacted by gun violence, and the folks that were on the streets that were doing the work were just paid just nothing, right? They were just their annual salary was really low. They were wearing all these different hats, right? And our young people were like, why would I want to get involved in community work? Why would I want to do what y'all are doing, being broke and stressed out? And so part of it too is kind of just changing that paradigm, right? And investing in our staff so that they're getting a living wage, so that they're able to provide for themselves and their family, and really so that our young people could see themselves in that and being like, hold on, I could get involved with community stuff. I could be part of this solution without being a martyr and killing myself either, right? So I think that's one thing that just comes to mind real fast that we don't often talk about, right? And for us, that we have a very strong strategy of hiring folks that are formerly incarcerated, folks that are coming back into the community to be solutions for their community. There's some organizations that just lowball that population because they're still rough around the edges. They're still developing their skill sets, right? And so our young people see that as well too, right? So part of it is also just making it cool to be part of this work, and to be able to give back to the community and have opportunities for them to earn extra dollars and incomes doing what they love to do, whether it's performing, whether it's vending, whether it's learning, like you talk about the block parties, whether it's learning how to set up a stage and do some of the behind the scenes work, right? And showing them that there's these different opportunities that they could get in kind of non-traditional settings. So I want to put a plug out there in terms of paying your staff right. There's some organizations that I have conversations with, and I'm like, what? You're paying your staff what? And then you see why they're having to get side gigs, and they're not fully invested in a movement of transforming community and trying to transform the world. So I urge everybody to treat their staff well, pay them well, and do a lot of self-care stuff, support with housing. We have a lot of transitional age staff that, you know, they're doing the work now, but they're struggling looking for housing, right? Like, how as an organization can we support them to be able to do that? Because when our staff are doing well, that are connected, that are on the ground, that has a big impact on the young people that they're serving, to be able to really do their best and show up in their best self. It's hard for us to say, it's easy for us to say, hey, you know, you got to fill your bucket up first. You got to take care of yourself before you can serve community. But if we're, as organizations, as leaders, not providing those opportunities to build our staff up and supporting them in that way, then they're going to be struggling, and they're going to be, you know, not modeling their best selves.
And so thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you're able to come back and speak to this experience of resistance, of client resistance. But how do we work through or view client resistance when trying to administer services to transitional age young folks? And what are some strategies that we can engage in?